What would you do if the most unforgettable day of your life was not marked by wealth, grand celebrations, or anything the outside world would call extraordinary, but by a sleepy baby's cry at dawn, a crooked diaper, a spoonful of pumpkin porridge, and the quiet terror of realizing how deeply you could love someone so small? In a modest home washed by early sunlight, Ly Tu Tien and CEO Jack move through one ordinary day with their 8-month-old daughter, Anna. But beneath the soft towels, warm milk, picture books, and evening lullabies lies something far more powerful than routine. There is exhaustion hidden behind smiles. There is fear beneath tenderness. There is the silent moral pressure of two adults learning that once a child enters your life, love is no longer only romance. It becomes vigilance, sacrifice, patience, and the aching joy of giving every part of yourself to someone who cannot yet speak your name. And in that long, gentle day, they come to understand that family is built not through dramatic vows, but through hundreds of small, faithful acts no one applauds. The day began with the kind of peace that always feels fragile when a baby lives in the house. Before the village had properly awakened, before the street outside found its usual rhythm, the first light had already slipped through the curtains in thin, tender bands, turning the bedroom floor pale gold. The room still carried the softness of sleep. The blanket lay half-folded at the edge of the bed. One pillow had been pressed deeper than the other. Somewhere beyond the window, a bird called once and then fell quiet again, as if even the morning understood that this house belonged, first and foremost, to a child's breathing. Then came the familiar murmur. Not a real cry yet, just the small, restless sound of a baby crossing the bridge between sleep and waking. Ly Tu Tien opened her eyes at once. There was something almost sacred in the speed with which a mother's body answers her child, even before her mind fully wakes. She turned, lifted the corner of the blanket, and there was Anna with her wide, round eyes already open, dark and clear as dew, staring upward as though she had personally summoned the morning. 8 months old, and already full of that particular energy babies carry, the kind that is both delicate and unstoppable. Tu Tien smiled immediately. No performance, no hesitation, just that deep, instinctive smile that seemed to come from the center of her chest. She bent over the baby, gathered her carefully into her arms, and kissed her soft cheek. "Good morning, my little one," she whispered, though the room was still so quiet that even a whisper felt large. From the next room, Jack stepped out not long after, his hair still carrying the disorder of sleep, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his face softened by the sight before him. In the outside world, he was a CEO, a man who lived among negotiations, schedules, risk, and pressure. But in the early light of that house, with his wife holding their daughter in the first glow of day, all of that fell away. What remained was a father whose heart had become permanently vulnerable. "You two were up before me," he murmured, coming closer. His hand came to rest gently against Anna's back. The baby blinked up at him, then kicked once beneath the blanket, as if to confirm she had indeed begun the day ahead of everyone else. They started with the diaper change. No one watching from the outside would think much of that moment. But the truth is, love in a family often reveals itself most honestly in the least glamorous acts. Tu Tien prepared the warm wipes, Jack opened the cabinet and reached for a clean diaper. He was efficient in boardrooms, confident in public, impossible to outmaneuver in business, but when it came to baby care, he was still endearingly imperfect. "You fastened it crooked," Tu Tien said, laughter rising into her voice before she could stop it. Jack looked down, then back up with mild offense and a smile he could not quite hide. Anna, as though fully aware she had become the center of a domestic comedy, kicked both of her chubby legs and let out a delighted sound that made the whole thing even more ridiculous. That was how the day truly began, not with efficiency, but with warmth. After that, Tu Tien washed Anna's face with a soft cloth, moving slowly so the coolness would not startle her. The baby reached toward the water, fascinated as always by things she could not yet understand. Jack, meanwhile, warmed a bottle of milk, checked the temperature with impossible seriousness, then handed it over as if delivering something precious. Tu Tien held Anna against her while she drank. That image alone could have carried the whole morning, the young mother with her child nestled into her chest, the father sitting near enough to touch both of them, the sunlight broadening softly across the room, and the unspoken awareness that this, right here, was the truest center of their lives. The morning bath came next. Not every day was a full bath day. Sometimes there was only a warm wipe down and a change of clothes. But today, perhaps because the air felt mild and clean, they decided on a proper bath. The small bathroom filled with the scent of soap and warm water. Anna splashed immediately, sending tiny droplets onto her own cheeks and onto Jack's sleeve. He stood nearby holding the towel, the bottle of soap, and the expression of a man fully prepared to help and still somehow not entirely prepared. "She's getting more mischievous," he said. "Just like her father," Tu Tien replied. It was a small joke, but it mattered, because even jokes between tired parents are little proofs that love is still alive under the weight of routine. After the bath, they brought Anna to the balcony for a few minutes of gentle sunlight. The light caught in the fine strands of her hair, making them glow like something too soft for the world. A breeze passed over the railing and brushed her face, and she stretched out both hands toward it with wonder, as though she had discovered air for the first time. Again, one of those tiny moments no stranger would remember. And yet those are the moments parents carry for the rest of their lives. Inside again, they placed her on the colorful playmat for her morning activity time. She crawled forward in determined little bursts, slapped at toy blocks, shook a rattle with the serious concentration of a child conducting research, and then lunged after a stuffed bear. Jack moved just far enough away to encourage the chase. "Come on, my little princess," he said softly. Anna answered with a squeal that sounded almost like agreement. Tu Tien sat nearby watching the two of them, and the sight warmed her so deeply it hurt. Jack looked silly on the floor in his half-work clothes, waving a stuffed animal and making exaggerated sounds just to earn another laugh from his daughter. It struck her then, as it often did, how strange and beautiful it was that life had brought her here, not to a dramatic version of happiness, but to this plain, tender reality. Breakfast came with pumpkin porridge. Tu Tien fed Anna in slow spoonfuls while Jack, seated across from them, pretended to eat from an imaginary bowl to encourage her. Each time he opened his mouth theatrically, Anna mirrored him, delighted by the game. Once, she flung a small splash of porridge onto his shirt, and the couple burst into laughter so suddenly that the baby stared at them in confusion before laughing too. This was the fragile calm of family life, not perfection, but shared mess. Then came the interruption. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, just sudden enough to remind them that love can be frightened very easily when it has something to lose. It happened during Anna's late morning standing practice. After her book time full of bright animals, silly voices, and Jack's embarrassingly committed attempts to imitate cows and dogs, she had grown bold. Jack placed her near the sofa and guided her hands to the cushion edge. Her little legs stiffened, her balance wavered. For one beautiful second, she stood on her own. Then she slipped. It was not a hard fall. Jack caught most of her weight, but the sound of her sudden cry sliced through the room with frightening speed, and everything in both parents changed instantly. The playfulness vanished. Tu Tien was on her knees before she was conscious of moving. Jack had already gathered Anna up. The baby's face reddened with shock, and her cry deepened into that trembling. Wounded sob all parents fear because it makes you feel as though the whole world has failed in 1 second. They checked her hands, her knees, her forehead, her breathing. Nothing serious. No injury beyond fright. And yet, what flooded the room was larger than the incident itself. It was the painful truth underneath all family tenderness. Once you become parents, your heart is no longer safely inside your own body. It lives, exposed, in your child. A tiny stumble can become a private catastrophe. A cry can drag ancient fear straight to the surface. Tu Tien took Anna into her arms and held her against her chest, swaying instinctively. Jack knelt in front of them both, one hand resting on the baby's back, the other on Tu Tien's knee, his face unusually pale. "I had her," he said quietly, though it sounded less like explanation and more like guilt. Tu Tien looked at him then and saw what perhaps only a wife can see in such moments: the silent self-blame of a good father, the way men sometimes punish themselves immediately and privately when a child is frightened under their care. "She's okay," she said, though her own voice trembled. They stayed like that longer than necessary, because sometimes the recovery matters more than the event. Sometimes love is proven in the pause after fear, when no one is performing strength, when two people simply kneel on the floor and hold the same child as if reassuring not only her, but themselves. Anna calmed at last, her breathing softened, her hands unclenched. Her cheek rested damp against Tu Tien's shoulder. And when Jack kissed her forehead and whispered something too low to hear, the room slowly returned to itself, but not unchanged. From that point on, the day deepened. The noon nap came as relief, rather than routine. While Anna slept with her little rabbit toy tucked against her side, Jack answered urgent emails from work, but not with his usual cold focus. He kept glancing toward the bedroom. Tu Tien tidied the house and prepared lunch ingredients, yet her hands moved more slowly, more carefully, as if all at once she had remembered just how breakable joy can be. When Anna woke, sleepy and warm, Jack went to her immediately. "Daddy's here," he murmured, and the words held more weight now than they had that morning. She settled against him with total trust. That trust, more than anything, seemed to humble him. The afternoon meal was salmon porridge with greens. Then came more play, more crawling, more encouragement, but gentler now. When Anna stood again with support from the sofa, both parents applauded, though their smiles carried the tenderness of people who had learned to celebrate courage more reverently. Later, they walked in the small garden behind the house. Jack carried Anna while Tu Tien walked beside them, showing her sparrows, yellow petals, and the shifting shapes of leaves in the wind. Dusk began gathering around the edges of the yard, and the whole world seemed to slow into a softer register. After dinner and one final wipe down, they dressed Anna in the softest pajamas Jack could find. Then, under warm yellow light, Tu Tien read a few more pages from the picture book while Jack patted the baby's back in a slow, steady rhythm. At last, Anna drifted to sleep. The house fell quiet, and in that quiet, Jack took Tu Tien's hand and held it with the seriousness of a man who had seen, in one ordinary day, both heaven and fear. There was gratitude in both of them then, but more than gratitude, there was understanding. Family was not built only through joy. It was built through constant returning after mess, after fear, after tears, after small falls, after long days. It was built in warm bottles, crooked diapers, shared laughter, frightened pauses, and the decision to keep loving with your whole body even when that love leaves you defenseless. That is why this story lingers. Because it reminds us that the most meaningful days in a family are rarely the loud ones. They are the days that begin in silk-like light, break open in one cry, and end with two tired adults watching over a sleeping child as if the whole future were breathing softly in front of them. And perhaps that is the most mature truth love ever teaches. Happiness is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to keep giving tenderness even after fear has shown you how much there is to lose.